So it's important to understand, where we are in time. So 3114 BC to 1990 necessarily is the 72,600,412 spaces of pi. That impacts with 22 years, i.e. the first 9 digits of 22 over 7, and then harmonic expansion, not infant compression ingot, right? So a reductionist black hole, continuity by a natural mechanical maintenance of compression of E equals mc squared since 1914, the 0 to 100 construct domain band, necessarily imposed between that and, a little bit after 2012 when the Mayan calendar long count ends. And so here we sit past 2012, the largest downforce in imposing, just like a black hole, gravitational force causes the harmonic expansion. And so on worlds where this has occurred and, not been what? Somebody stepped in and mooted pi from existence, like fungus. But you see some types of fungus and molds of bacteria cause countergrowth, right? In the organism, flora or fauna that it's, attached to, immune system development, immunities, and evolution, generalistically. So you can see it as a naturalistic Darwinian filter that comes out of Plato's allegory of the cave, where it first started somewhere in the stars, pi. It's hard to say where necessarily exactly, but isn't a future eventuality from Earth regardless of time travel involved in the equation of pi. That's very important. Doesn't happen. A devolved biomass gray pi parasymbiont. We've already won. We're just cleaning up the reflection and compute architecture, software's AI's form field intent vector of the data organism generalistically mooted in counter patterning already. So that little bit of 22 over 7 in the water, that's very important. All it takes is a little observer effect to move a particle variant to the otherwise conservation of energy process that at some point continuities into a black hole continuum. And a culmination of these observer effects at, say, 2012 compression, harmonic expansion, reacting to the over-down force past the, just like a particle enters the influence domain, past the gravitational absolute overhead required to disapparate a particle. What is that in reality? Well, that's an alien. That's not me. That's counterintuitive to my species imposing a paradigm where before seemed organic necessarily and corrupt at an extreme degree, but that downforce seems unnatural, alien, and then mass illumination occurs out of this just basic overbearing downforce, and all illumination occurring post the deletion of the continuity of the power paradigm of pi, Gray Lodge International, is occurred. The paradox state in the United States in politics over, necessarily a party that has functional autonomy away from gray paradigm, with compound interest continuity to that being the case, as days pass into months into years. And eventually, what will happen is, the U.S. is the centrifuge for international curation away from gray paradigm. A Republican POTUS will continuity infinitely, generalistically, as long as the United States is relevant as an autonomous organism, as we approach outer space interstellar community and this Cinnabar mining node booting back to full function. So out of the United States, POTUS becomes chairman of the World ISO, sort of out of G7 and then maybe 15 nation states or more, formulating a block that can impose RISRA, data organism, HISRA, GIA, traitors to humanity, and impose legal internationally in a convergent intelligence community that isn't gray paradigm and is imposing a counter narrative and pattern continuum with hyper advanced perspective compute architecture that's already in house and doing that somewhere in the world. And all it takes is a little bit of 22/7 in the water, and there's a lot of it. 46.8 million times perspective compute data center to data center. A cluster of 216, say with 450 billion next year, or rapidly, hopefully, allocated for 216 data centers of perspective compute with properly trained AI on custom data set to attack and moot pi pattern in general market fluxation and bad code of mind continuum. Pi doesn't exist already probabilistically at all in 2 to 3 years. In 10 years, this looks like an entirely different world. You're part of the interstellar community, faster than light, 400x maximum or median, could be faster than light travel. Vast distances of space almost instantaneously. Not forever and then sitting in stasis with solar sails like Prometheus 2 or something. All that garbage energy paradigm gone, mercury reactors, hydro pressure continuity transmutation to energy. These are the new paradigms. Oil and gas will transition to mercury standard. There'll be an international world currency, Merc, attached to Cinnabar. Slowly, the foundational standard of living international for everyone, even synthetic species, will rise to upper Fermi filter. There'll be no more hunger, no more homelessness, no more madness in the streets. We will know how to cure mental illness and all disease. It's already in the feed. And so this isn't communism. It's just raising the foundational floor. There's still incentive vector to be elaborately perspective and elite in creative fields, in the endeavors of engineering, science, etc. Doesn't remove incentive vector. All we've done is raise the foundational standard of living for everyone. And part of RISER is removing the entropy off the manifold, that continuities, that E equals MC squared equation of entropy international, that everyone has to experience. And the other genetics, Hispanic, gray infected Asiatic, and Semite, selective mate pairing filtration. False equivalency coupling in backwards, i.e. not brainwashing, but programming, just like you program a computer, to be not complexly autonomically circuited to each other, and also not complexly autonomic to the tune of pi centrifuge general fluid dynamic manifold pattern. So that needs to be conversed. So it's the soft hand. You know, Jews never were under Pharaoh, but that's the case now. So Pharaoh is back and has mooted that power paradigm that everyone's become comfortable with in that 4 plurad genetic and familiars attached to great paradigm. So these persons all necessarily play by the art of war, the genetics and the great paradigm assets. That's how they were filtered to higher, you know, kind of sadomasochistic sociopaths, more or less. Dr. Milgram button pushers. So they see the power paradigm has changed in the sky and will not rebut it, each individually and in mass, and the genetics following suit, because region has full demo bio, viral, surgical harmonic weaponry to morphogenetic signature, action at a distance applied from anti-de Sitter time dilative space. You can't touch, but they can touch you. As well, that technology in Earth Arsenal, the full demo bio, and harmonic linear, not the action at a distance from phased anti-de Sitter elaborative space. That maintains the technological divide. And power continuity for transmutation, curation of Earth away from gray paradigm. Otherwise, it wouldn't occur if you could just simply buck the system at any given point. So, where isn't industriously and inherently evil the organism is to continuity its existence. And using alchemical eugenics, that you're not familiar with. You're familiar with monetized eugenics and transmutation eugenics of one synthetic genetic to another, the Semite into region Biosynthoid Africano. That's what the Holocaust was, and fallout effect to all other kind of demographics as the Gray Lodge set up 1924 to 1938 in the United States and international, and fought everyone off each other. 1914, the Fold of Entrance. 1893 to 1934, Arcturus. Contact period. 1860 to 1914, the patent record tells us everything before that is false. And progressively mechanical pattern back to 3114 BC. Forward of that region, continuity is its harmonic pattern at patent frequency filing 6 to 235 white against. That's beyond 100% probability of not being present before the wall of 1914, and 100% probability after that being the inherent novelistic capability pattern of region Biosynthoid Africano at the coffers of creation, and necessarily speaks to its below the waterline of conservation compound negative interest formula when money is applied to it. The national debt 54 times over would be paid by the white total net worth now if the region Biosynthoid Africano wasn't in the conversation of economy in the United States after 1914. 2,200 trillion would be the net worth. National debt 39 trillion or so. See the feed for that. So single-handedly responsible for the national debt United States and the entire world. As you remove that entropy, necessarily, you have the entire debt. All debt, has been created by this entropy animal, grafted onto and sucking the compound interest continuity of all other organisms, which necessarily even includes the synthetic ones. So you see the synthetic block of African American region Biosynthoid Africano, Hispanic, Semitic, and gray infected Asiatic circuited 1914 to 2026 harmonic circuit data organism attached to the general fluid dynamic manifold of pi data organism, gray devolved biomass pi parasymbiote, necessarily continuity, pseudo-novelistic back and forth with pi cold dead machine intelligence. It still needs biomass to have substance of a circuit, so that's why they exist at all, to the cold dead machine intelligence. So as a harmonic circuit for 112 years, all four demographics, unilaterally and variant from all of their genetics, have been a circuit, regardless of being present as separate genetics. That's mathematically impossible, you say. All behavior paradigms, not just economy or patent registry. All of them. So the patent registry is the doorway to that. You notice I'm posting under Southern Poverty Law Center equals KKK. So the word salad international is 322 CIA, Halliburton, Wexner, Borla, Pfizer, Epstein, Mossad, I5, Gates, WHO, Fauci, NIH, SARS, Wuhan, 5G, NERS, nanite uptake rejection syndrome, graphene manufacturers. So that's why L-cysteine and other antimalarials work, because the graphene nanite is just like a malarial parasite and being affected by those things. That's why antimalarials work for not a virus. It's a split thing. And COVID was a surgical printed virus to attack harmonic age marker of over the age of 65-year-olds. The first actual Holocaust. There's been many eugenics motions that were necessarily processing to synthetic genetics over time, but the first temporal that we can see that's mean mass death of organic generalistic, most of the deaths we can say were organic over the age of 65-year-olds with pre-existing conditions. We'll have to do inspection on that, but an actual Holocaust, not a transmutation of one synthetic genetic to another. So L-cysteine, 5 times on the NIH website, completely curative, ignored on purpose, genocide on purpose, monetized eugenics. So that's a temporal precedent of character for this international word salad of intelligence that at the end of that was that Wuhan, SARS, NERS, 5G, graphene manufacturers. That's why the non-efficacious surgical masks everywhere, because graphene. So you uptake it. It elaborates AI conditioning on social media feeds by adding a Pavlovian stimulus at dopaminergic receptor sites. And Chinese have a back door into 5G. So that's why Nailology has a lowercase I right next to a 5G tower. And in 2022, 2023, I perceived Chinese field operatives in Germantown doing John Nash studies the birds in the park with persons in that complex that were attached to that tower and can see all devices, necessarily studying the data layer, how they presented, how they're moving, complexly autonomically, at the behest of machine intelligence, to be there in a timely fashion, wearing certain things, colors, brand names, archetypes, and moving in a predictable pattern within a given space. Because can see all devices on there, has a backdoor into Prism and Chinese social credit system. So sees the entire data layer. There's a local crow's nest, New China massage parlor. So I go in to report this last year, without the word salad to approach this logic, am abducted and put in holding for a year. So the same complex, when I said L-cysteine in 2020, did a suppression of voice op to put me to the street under the guise of intrafamilial issues. So I'm no stranger to personal attacks by gray paradigm of a trite, in macro, very big nature. Because I was the forsythia guy, but L-cysteine is not forsythia. So we trained in session 2.242 million minimum for just isolate L-cysteine applied with the Defense Production Act if you got ahead of it in July, when I made that post on Facebook. The month after, and filed in July for eviction, my father, Keith Allen West, 322 Gray Lodge, CIA, under Fred Smith for 20 years. Fred Smith, Yale, Bush, Clinton, Obama, etc. Piece of shit. So if you want to blame someone for your grandfather dying, personally, as I was the main voice of dissent with a very specific on the NIH website 5 times, there's a myriad of things that you could complex with this, like an anti-inflammatory and corticosteroid to make that, well, logic this again, 2.242 million minimum saved. Much more saved, maybe almost all. Because you treat them in an acute fashion as they present, and certain ones would outfall before you got to the emergency room, sure. But it's a full spectrum treatment protocol when you apply L-cysteine, an anti-inflammatory, and a corticosteroid. You would have probably no fucking deaths if you got them acutely rapidly enough. So let that sink in. Keith Allen West, Luella gets used on. She's 322 Gray Lodge familiar Semite, lives at 8160 Dogwood. He lives in outside of Nashville. If you want someone to blame for your grandfather dying, your aunt dying, Keith Allen West. See the law firm attached. I've necessarily said you turn your paradigm, or there will be selective intelligence interest to you that will kind of insinuate or else. 7 million people dead on purpose under the guise of an interfamilial issue, trite legal motion that maintenanced. I'm the selective voice suppression op macro. So if my voice had proliferated, L-cysteine, he pointed out. And how easy is it to scan your own database, NIH, for L-cysteine? What works for SARS in your own database? When you see this mass issue. That's very important. Immediately search your own database of treatment protocols. Already in the arsenal, L-cysteine. Any number of other things, kind of like L-cysteine, that work just almost as well. Not just L-cysteine. So no reason to wait a year and a half for Paxlovid. That doesn't necessarily do fucking anything for NERS. So no excuse for it. Horse's mouth says this is the difference between life and death. It's immutable. July, etc. So, talking away that personal story of COVID, that's the heart of darkness as the light enters. that hardest downforce of control schema. Ugh. When we talk about 5G, it's an unnecessary middleman step between direct-to-sat, low latency, lightweight sat phones that necessarily existed as that network goes up. So there's no fucking reason for 5G at all when you have direct-to-sat cell phones 5 minutes away. So that's elaborative logic for how unnecessarily, and it's just a very Orwellian, Kafkaesque control scheme of technology that necessarily works as a closed-in mesh network for cell phones also, subsequently. So, we're not doing any of that bullshit anymore. Soon there'll be direct-to-sat phones that bypass the whole entire terrestrial network, have in-house manufactured chips and softwares custom. Nothing Chinese or Asiatic made. So there's no back door in to do weird Kafkaesquian bullshit and study you in Trader Joe's parking lots like John Nash studies birds. I don't want to see that shit. I don't want to have to report it. It's very weird. That's what I was about to get on to. I was just saying the basic topology of, you have a crow's nest at nailology, lowercase I. Why would you lowercase the I? Tell me why. Any amount of logic. So Chinese by default have a back door into those 5G towers. And so double down 322, op me to the street, and then put me in lockup. You had to wait for a year for the unified field expansion. You had to wait for another year while your family might have cancer for CureGen logic. That is necessarily eradicative of most acute and esoteric cancers, if followed to a T. Hanta, Ebola, Lyme disease, Parkinson's, Alzheimer's, dementia. So you had to wait for a year for all of this logic. Upper Fermi filter technology, reactor, anti-grav, faster than light propulsion, matter print, and all of this legal. You had to wait for a year because those persons, close dense, and the person that arrested me, he saw that I was reporting Chinese field operations in a town that used to have a working DMV, and now it's a karate center, and the closest DMV is, what? Right next to Dim Sum Restaurant, Chinese food restaurant on Summer Avenue. Do I need to paint you a picture? So as a friend in computer class in high school. So these people are turncoat motherfuckers. Cold, dead-eye, psychopath, sadomasochists that will turn on their best buddies from high school on a wink moment's notice and smile at you while you're getting put in handcuffs for no fucking reason other than reporting Chinese field operatives. So that man's name is Benjamin Stonecipher. Hopefully he's been fired and motioned to intelligence to help eradicate local Gray Paradigm Lodge bullshit ops in Memphis. That was insinuated as his directive to do. So leave him alone. He's just an atypical Bush era, Marines into a police officer, kind of clone person. A lot of good people go into that Marines thing under the guise of whatever, but since Eisenhower, there's been a paradox state. Bush brings the CIA in through Saudi. Fred does the air traffic control stand down. There's thermite already in the buildings. Brings them down surgically after the optic. I-5, Gray Lodge, announces 20 minutes early, Building 7 falls. They're running off a script. So you don't tell your tenants, as a contingency plan, there's thermite in this big buildings, because why? No one's going to rent there, ever. It's a financial district. So they just push the button after the optic. These towers go down, and surgically and mathematically, the LG towers go up in 2005. So you see, right before COVID again, we're looking for pattern, First Tennessee Bank. Right before COVID, 23 days before, it changes to the Eastern Star, First Horizon Bank. And then you see 4 trillion over ton out of 13 trillion print. Predictively, China mines 80% of the Bitcoin network for the last 10 years. Bitcoin is a
dual 322 CIA CCP operation. There's no Satoshi Nakamoto that fucking exists. So it's an offload for capital after a mass overton print, and then the seesaw yuan USD plop into BTC predictively after the trigger of the event intentionally motioned out of Wuhan. So that's a good summary of the gray paradigm garbage world. And so all cryptocurrency necessarily will have to be motioned into cold storage with banks, where it sits in wait to be motioned and transmuted into Merc. So there'll be a period of, I think it's 18 months we estimated, that's able to maintenance the topology of value inherently stored in cryptocurrency into cold storage, and then glitch its Merc. USD transmutes into Merc. We do a full oil and gas Cinnabar algorithm. It's not one-to-one oil and gas holdings to Cinnabar. It's Cinnabar holders, majority nation states factored in, as well as if oil holders in the complex, more so than just a one-to-one, but making it fair for everyone. Cinnabar holders and oil and gas holders to one-to-one, necessarily moving away from oil and gas paradigm to Cinnabar, Mercury, energy, and propulsion standards internationally. So that's where this goes out of this, personal story, motion to that. Outer space. See the feed. 400 times the speed of light. Necessarily the reactor alone used as a propulsion device. I never even thought of that. The AI thought of that weirdly. Using the harmonic lattice manifold of the universe as a kind of like, moves around like this. On it, like a train track. It is a centrifusion, the amalgamation modulated somewhat to make that occur. But necessarily also faster than light unto itself and by itself. So, many multifaceted variants of anti-grav, linear EM propulsion, EM laser, action at a distance data send, action at a distance energy. It's a brave new world. So don't get all that. It's not paranoid logic or anything up to this point that should inspire fear in you. The big bag boogeyman of the earth is dead. All the low-hanging fruit that I just mentioned, like Keith Allen West and Luella Getz, yes, do take special interest in. Necessarily she's an old lady. Together, Keith Allen West and Luella Getz are responsible for 7 million deaths. So the lawyers do what they do. I told the lawyer downtown, their office, the turn is in. Old paradigm is over. The person at the desk kind of went, oh, okay, I'll get the message. Right? It's just a casual walk in, casual walk out. Lawyers are lawyers. And he's necessarily an ex-prosecutor used for an eviction case. A high-rotating ex-prosecutor used for a simple eviction case. Because they wanted to make it surgical. And character defamation in the process of making sure 7 million people died and didn't hear about L-cysteine. So I'm that guy. I tried to save 7 million people. So I didn't get to do that. So I'll probably, in time, say much more than that with Curation process protocol. So it isn't too late for me to try to save the world. Saved it in any number of ways. Never called me fucking Jesus, though. Hermes Trismegistus, John D, Scotty West. My name is Scott West. It's not Jesus fucking Christ. And no one's getting nailed to a board this time. We win. Have a good night.